Hi, good afternoon. First of all, I want to say thank you to the organizers for inviting me, and a special thank you to Yossi Vardi for bringing the Tel Aviv weather. Are we enjoying this amazing weather in New York?
Finally.
Awesome. So I have an incredible panel. What I'd love to do is just give everyone a moment and a chance to introduce yourselves. Deepak, I think we just heard a little bit from you, so if you don't mind, maybe we'll skip your introduction. Ellie, share with us a couple words. Tell us about yourself.
Sure. Great to be with everyone today. I'm Ellie Wheeler. I'm a partner at Greycroft. We're a multi-stage venture firm based in New York and LA. Been around since 2006, investing in a variety of things, anything internet or mobile enabled.
Awesome. Edward, please.
Yeah, I'm the founder of Catalyst Funds, and we are investing in Israeli technology companies since 1993. Established also an investment bank which is raising capital for Israeli technology companies. Mostly we raise money in Europe and in Asia. We have been, in the last three funds, focusing on maturing technology companies. So we have portfolio companies that from Israel, such as Mobileye, Tufin, and diversified portfolio in biotech, medtech, TMT, and mobile technologies. That's what we do.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So I didn't introduce myself. Ziv Klein, founder and CEO of Landmark Ventures. We're essentially a New York-based investment bank. We're about 35 people here. We've been involved with 500 startups over 20 years. And my honor to make this interesting and exciting for all of you. So with that, Edward, we're going to keep it to you first. Our theme today is about entrepreneurs. Something I've observed, and perhaps you have too, we're seeing a lot of first, second, and third round entrepreneurs. As they mature and perhaps they get more sophisticated, what do you think the needs, how has that changed from their perspective?
I mean, when we invest in companies, it's true that we look at the track record of the entrepreneurs. That's a key element, and we like to invest in a team that has already made it in the past, that have already established successful stories. And but obviously, you learn from the past. From my perspective, what we see is that those that are more mature are also looking at the threats for their company, and the key threat that we find is really the obvious need of cash of those companies. That's what triggers the success of many of those entrepreneurs. So they are more conservative. They raise money where they can raise the money. They are not trying necessarily to optimize the value. And I think that's something that maybe when you get old, you are more conservative in the way you look at things. Yeah.
Elliot, a question to you then. Let's now look at a first-time entrepreneur. When they come to you, what do you think are the general needs or types of advice that they might be looking for, of course, in addition to capital?
Sure. Well, I think there's a lot of different types of even first-time entrepreneurs. You can have an experienced operator who has deep domain expertise, who really understands the problem that they're trying to solve, with 20 years of operating experience, who's hired and fired big teams and really understands all that. And that's going to be a different set of needs, maybe a different network, maybe kind of more support around day 0 to day 360, right? The chaos at the beginning, the chaos that continues. Maybe they're used to additional resources. But if it's a first-time founder and maybe it's their first experience or maybe their second work experience, then it's certainly going to be a different set of needs. But when you've got a broad portfolio, you tend to see a bunch of different things. So hopefully we can support them in the way they need it.
Thank you for that. Deepak, to you, as we think of the ability of a corporation to provide value-added services, that might be a little different than your two counterparts. So when they come to you, a same first-time entrepreneur, how do you look at that opportunity perhaps different than if you were a pure investment fund?
Yeah, so typically what we do is we co-invest. So a lot of the things that we would look for, like we expect a lead investor to go and check the box and make sure the team's the right team, they are solving the right problem. Where we tend to focus on what's the value SAP can deliver to the entrepreneur. Is it something that we can work with in terms of getting them access to our customer base? Is it something that we could do in terms of getting them access to data and APIs to build a better algorithm? What's a strategic fit? So we look at a little bit more of the tangibles in terms of the opportunity, the market fit, the size of the price. We tend to focus less on the intangibles, which is probably what you guys might focus on more. And the reason why, because we don't lead rounds. We do more of the co-investing.
Interesting. Edward, you are involved generally in 3 geographies, Europe, China, and Israel. tell us a little bit from an international perspective, how do the entrepreneurs perhaps approach the strategic or value-added component different than just the need for immediate capital?
You know, obviously, the Israeli companies have to look at the global market. The Israeli market is so tiny that they think globally. And most of the Israeli startups are focusing on the US because that's the largest market for them. There are a lot of bankers and actors in the US that are active in Israel. So that's why when we started our activity back in '93, we focused on two niches that were untapped, the European market and the Chinese market. Now, it's true that many of the players in Israel, it's easier for them to access the American market because of the language skills you need, obviously, and the network that they may have in the US. In Europe, it's more complicated than in China because it's a different culture, different languages. So our role is really to identify the right strategic partners for them when we invest in a company. It's more complicated to do it in China than in Europe, so you need strong local partners to help you doing that. Fortunately, we have strong partners in China and in Hong Kong, so we are trying to help opening doors, knowing that you need the financial resources in order to enter into multiple markets. So if you have limited resources, I would focus first on the US, and Europe and China comes later.
And is it true that Israeli companies won't accept any advice?
You know, it's very special in that we say, how come the Israelis don't make love on the street? And it's because you will always hear how to do it better. So we don't need advice. Obviously, it's a special culture, and the people are more focused on action and less on advice.
There is a downside to the Israeli chutzpah. We definitely are aware of that.
Yeah.
Ellie, if I could self-proclaim you the expert now on the U.S. ecosystem,
Sure.
contrasting perhaps the East and the West Coast, can you share with us a little bit about what you think of when you evaluate entrepreneurs? And again, the same question, how do they look at the strategic or value add in addition to capital?
Sure. I actually think the difference between East and West Coast is pretty small at this point.
Okay.
There was a moment in time where it was a bit different before the New York ecosystem has developed in the way that it has. Clearly, there are more successes, more public companies still on the West Coast, and more of the large strategics, so that's undeniable. But in terms of kind of breadth of sectors and even the experience set amongst the talent base here, there's so much in New York that I think that is really much more narrow, and even investment terms and different things have also kind of settled. In terms of openness to advice, again, I think it's fairly similar. There are, in other kind of tertiary or secondary markets in the US, there's obviously going to be fewer people who've seen scale. There's going to be less kind of digital marketing acumen that has taken a company from 0 to 100. So, that's the type of thing, the talent in the ecosystem, and that particular executive who's seen that challenge before, where the talent pool is just, kind of not as deep in some of those markets that haven't evolved.
Deepak, I have an interesting question for you. Mark Suster at Upfront Ventures initiated something called the Inclusion Clause. For those who may not be familiar with it, they modeled it after something called the Rooney Rule in the NFL, and they said, if you accept our capital, we ask that you interview a woman or a person of color for every position in your management team. I think that's catching some momentum now, and I'm seeing a lot of other organizations hopefully buy into that. And so, as a corporate, first and foremost, what is your opinion of the idea of diversity and inclusion at a broad sense as we look at entrepreneurship? And then would you support something like an inclusion clause, either as a mandate or as a recommendation to the investments that you guys make?
I think the inclusion clause itself is a fantastic idea, right? So the question is going to be, how does it get executed? The devil's in the detail. If I have to look broadly in terms of diversity in technology entrepreneurship, it's got to be a commitment. It cannot be something that you just do because your investors are asking you to do it, or your shareholders are asking you to do it, or your employees are asking you to do it. I think it needs to be a top-down mandate. It also it needs to change. The change has to come from the management, the CEO. Now, the good news is that there's a lot of awareness. The bad news is there's not a lot of action. So if you want to be able to go and make some changes, I think actually doing the things and experiencing success, like what we are doing with the accelerator in New York, is what's going to drive value, and what's going to also change mindsets. When people see the difference in terms of like making an active investment in women entrepreneurs or minority entrepreneurs, you're starting to support more and more either mentorship or even like some kind of you're running meetups. Then you get to see the power of the ecosystem, and the ecosystem is out there. Women entrepreneurs are out there. It just needs the right amount of like incentives to get them out and actively starting up companies.
Ellie, if I can keep it on that theme for a moment, you are the only woman on this panel. There's a statement that says if you diversify the money, you'll diversify the investment. I don't know if I agree with that necessarily or not, but flipping the coin now to the fund level, I don't think there's a particularly large amount of diversity on the investor side. I'm curious what advice or opportunities you think exist in the marketplace, and perhaps what a group like this can do about that.
Sure, I think it's undeniable. There's only 9% of investing partners at funds, I think it's just in the US, are women. So, I mean, clearly there's a bit of a gap there. And it does make a difference. Who's writing the check does, in fact, broaden the companies that are getting funded and what those entrepreneurs look like, where they come from, the diversity of backgrounds. I think ultimately it comes down to money. It has to be a bad financial decision to not have a diverse set of people at the table. And I think that will become increasingly clear that it is a bad financial decision, and once that is obvious, it'll change.
I think the best line I've heard about diversity, we had a conversation with Ken Frazier, who's the CEO of Merck, happens to be, I think at the time, one of 3 African-American CEOs in the Fortune 500, and he says, I'm often asked to make the case for diversity, and he says, make the case for homogeneity. And I thought that was such a profound way to approach it the other way. Why do I have to make the case for diversity? You make the case for everything being the same. And if we think of disruption and innovation, I think it occurs at the extersection, not the intersection of a lot of topics. On the outside, innovation occurs in the fringe, not necessarily at the core. And diverse teams, I think, bring a lot of that differentiated perspective. Thank you for that. Please.
And it also starts like, if you're running a fund, like just look at your fund and see the people that are there. So in the fund and foundry that we run in SAP, close to 50% are women. So, and women, women venture capitalists, women accelerator MDs, are born to be more empathetic to women founders. So I think it's every fund, every VC, corporate VC or institutional VC needs to look at their team and see what can they do differently.
Thank you for that. Edward, to you, one of the things I'm occasionally known for as a moderator is a little thing I call the lightning round. So for the next few minutes, we're going to ask really fast questions. We're going to get back really fast answers. Are you guys ready? Awesome. Can I get a soft drum roll, guys? Really? All right, Edward, here we go. Ready? Good board members should
be sensitive to the entrepreneurs.
Ellie, bad board members shouldn't.
Talk too much.
Good answer. Deepak, if it rains in the cloud, then it's a cloud question. It's a joke.
There's thunder somewhere.
All right, a little bit of a slower question, Edward, to you. If I go to invest in China, I should be careful about.
You should be careful about investing alone, and you should find Chinese investors that you trust that will be investing alongside with you.
Ellie, a trend I'm excited about is?
Refocusing the healthcare paradigm around the actual patient experience and thinking of the patient as the consumer.
Deepak, a good mentor needs to?
Listen.
What?
Listen.
Yeah.
I'm just messing around. All right, one more round. You guys ready? Yeah. Tough one. Edward, Deepak should
come to discover Israel.
Okay. Have you been to Israel?
Yep, last year.
Okay.
Yeah.
How about we'll do this together? Deepak should buy more Israeli companies, should invest more in Israel, should open up more operations. There we go.
Well, you can buy more U.S. companies, too.
There we go. All right, awesome. We're buying all our companies.
You just wrote a $2.6 billion check for Calidus, so yeah, sure.
Ellie, Edward should
bring more companies to the U.S.
All right.
That's right.
Deepak, I should
be less sarcastic.
Okay, so that's the end of the lightning round. Thank you guys. I appreciate that. So, well, thank you. So we have a couple minutes left, so I kind of want to slow down. Deepak, to you, there's a whole lot of trends. I think it's always interesting to hear from the investors on some of the things that we're excited about. So a similar question to Ellie, kind of one word. What's something that maybe would surprise people to learn that SAP is active and involved with?
Blockchain. So we believe in the value of blockchain in terms of how transformative it is. There's a lot of hype around blockchain in terms of whether it's real or not. I think fundamentally it's a fantastic technology architecture. The implementation is going to be, I think there's a clear problem blockchain solves. It solves a trust problem in inter-enterprise collaboration. It solves the transparency problem in a very elegant way. Like you could do things without blockchain, for sure. You could do reconciliation systems and you could do complex calculations to make sure everybody has the same information. But then like the blockchain makes it so much more elegant. So I think the idea of blockchain creating value for in enterprises is underrated. And a lot of it is probably not seen because of the whole hype around cryptocurrency and everything else around it.
Thank you for that. Ellie, make the case for an entrepreneur in this room accepting Greycroft's money and not the VC down the road from you.
So we take a slightly different approach. We're happy to co-invest with the VC down the road from us. So it's, we tend to be pretty flexible. We actually take a syndicated approach. We can lead, we can co-lead, we can follow. We want kind of the right size round and the right people around the table. So sometimes that's us leading a round and bringing in a great co-investor, and sometimes that's us joining that round. So we tend to be more cooperative.
What do you do in terms of deal flow? Kind of how do you find the opportunities that, let's say, you personally get excited about?
Sure. A lot of that is still network driven, but there is a hierarchy to kind of those introductions. So typically it is going to be a warm introduction. That's just one filter that helps at the very top of the funnel. But the very best one would be an entrepreneur who's made us a bunch of money. That we'd backed before. That will be number one. Typically they're going to also be investing in that company since they did make that bunch of money, and then it kind of goes from there. But obviously, if we've already invested in that portfolio founder, that's a great filter for us.
Awesome, thank you. Edward, you had earlier talked about co-investment and the idea of having a local Chinese partner. As we reflect for a moment, there are angels, venture capital funds, corporate venture, family office. From your perspective, what are the types of co-investor types that you enjoy in terms of other funds that you like to bring in or you like to see as part of a syndicate?
Typically there are, I would say, two types of co-investors. Either are LPs that we invite to co-invest alongside us. Because we're investing in more mature company, we need more funding, and we go to them. We have a special relationship with them, so it's easier. But ideally, if I have to choose an external investor, I would try to find a strategic investor that knows the industry, that can bring value, can open doors, can bring some opportunities for the company to grow.
One thing that I think is often under-discussed is failure. I think a lot of times on panels like this, everybody talks about their wins, their successes, how good we look. This is an industry where people lose a lot of money. Let's name it, right? So Edward, maybe staying on that for a moment, tell us a little bit about some of the lessons you've learned, if you feel comfortable, maybe a failure or two.
I don't know any failures, so I'm...
You don't? You're Israeli, I know that, right?
No, I'm kidding. Obviously, when we invest in early stage companies, the rate of failure was much higher. And if I look at the portfolio, for example, the first fund, the one of 93, when we invest in early stage, we fail on many of the medical device companies because it took more time and more financial resource to get the FDA approval. And many of those failures are not necessarily linked to the technology or to the management, but to the inability of the management to raise the money, or the company to raise the money. And that's why they had to stop their operation. So that's maybe the main reason for failing for many of the portfolio companies.
Ellie, staying with that theme for a moment, we had talked earlier about entrepreneurial traits or characteristics. Are there any things that you occasionally see in a team or an individual that perhaps is a flag for you and might be a signal to pass on a given deal, maybe versus being more excited about another one?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a bunch. They're coming to us and trying to convince us to, believe in the vision and that they're going to be able to execute it. So we need to understand why that founder is the one who's going to be able to take advantage of that opportunity. And sometimes it's obvious because of their experience or because of a unique insight, but other times it isn't. And if they have trouble making the case, it means they're going to have trouble with upstream financing. It means they're going to have trouble with recruiting. So there's a lot of things that aren't perfect about the pitch process, but there are things that you can learn. So certainly, really not being able to sell, not being able to make the case is going to be a problem. And then, really not being committed. Sometimes they're doing 3 or 4 different things. That's not something that's really going to work. It's super hard to do even when you're spending 110% of your time on it.
That's a great point. Thank you. Deepak, as we look at corporate investing, I think there is occasionally a concern that says a big corporate like SAP, or as the Israelis call it, SAP, they just do, I don't know why, and Oracle, that's another one I like, Oracle. So SAP is going to come in and say, they're going to swallow us, they're going to be too big, we're not going to know how to work with them. How would you overcome that objection if a great company was concerned about accepting your money?
Yeah, I think it's probably the biggest concern that a lot of startups have is that how do they work with large corporations? Large corporations have a different time scale. They are glacial, they work slowly. The startups want a quick introduction to a customer or an API that needs to be integrated immediately. So I think it's about setting the right expectations. Is that, okay, it's not going to be easy. Like, there's going to be value in the long term. It's a journey. We are here together. And it's also about trust. So ultimately, if we can work with the startups and the startups can work with us and make sure that there's the right end objective, and then we are here together, that's what's going to help startups convince to take money from us or join our accelerator program for that matter.
Thank you for that. So as we wind down our panel, Edward, to you, and we'll kind of work our way back down, in terms of a closing thought or a final remark, what is a prediction or something that's on your mind as we look to the 12 or 18 months ahead? It's a fast-moving landscape. We had talked about some of the needs on the entrepreneurial side, some of the changes from a funding perspective. What is something that you're kind of watching or observing and think might be of value for our audience?
I think what we've learned that the needs if you look at the venture-backed companies, at least the one in Israel, it takes on average 15 years from the time you get the first funding from a venture fund to the exit.
Wow.
So probably 10 years ago it was around 5 years. So you need funding capabilities which are much deeper than what you needed in the past, because the time for exit takes more time, it takes more resources. So while there is a lot of, we have seen the crisis of 2000, we have seen the crisis of 2008, and at one time maybe the markets will be closed. So again, we have to respond to the needs of those companies, and you see more and more shift of funds doing more growth capital. It's very difficult to back a company at a seed stage. So one of the challenges would be for the early stage company, how will they get funding from the venture capital community, knowing that there will be a shift where the traditional ventures, at least in Israel, will shift to more growth capital.
Thank you very much for that. Ellie, same question.
Slightly different. I think there's so much capital out there right now that if you need it, go get it. There is, the next. We don't know when it ends. We've been predicting it since 2015. If you just keep predicting it often enough, eventually you're right. But right now, the market is frothy. There's a lot of capital. There's a lot of interest. They've got to put it to work. Same goes on the M&A side. People are interested. People are engaging. So there's a lot happening in the market, and I would take advantage.
Closing thoughts.
Let's talk corporate venture capital, right? So if you're looking to take money from corporate venture capital, understand what you're trying to get back. Again, there's a lot of capital out there. Is there real value? It's not as though like you're trying to sell a solution to a corporate and using the CVC as a way to do it. That shouldn't be the objective. The true incremental value is there's something that you can do together with a corporate that can actually be more than the sum of the parts. I think that's how like the startups should look at corporate venture capitalists when they look at taking money from CVCs.
Amazing. So my closing thoughts is, first of all, thank you to my amazing panel. Thank you to the organizers. Thank you to you, the audience. And I wish that hopefully all of you get a chance to meet these amazing people, partner and collaborate them. We would be very lucky to have you as board members. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.